Hi, LinkedIn, and good afternoon if you are listening, tuning in Europe. My lovely guest from the podcast this week, Katrijn van Oudheusden. I hope I said that right. I did look it up. I admit I had to look up. The first name was fine. I think the surname, though, I was like, I have to make sure I get this right because it's a long one as well. And so Katrijn is here, who was my guest on the latest podcast episode, which came out on Friday just gone, and we talked. We got pretty deep. Katrijn, I think you'll agree with me on that. We got kind of deep in the podcast, but it was so interesting. Not anything I'd really talked about before. And as I mentioned in any of my recent posts that you would have seen, that Katrijn is talking about the kind of stuff that I haven't seen. I haven't seen anyone else talking about this kind of stuff on LinkedIn. So I think she has a really, really important message to share. Katrijn, do you want to kind of introduce yourself, a little bit about your background, and can maybe talk about some of the highlights from the podcast episode?
Yeah, so currently I'm a leadership coach for selfless leadership, and we'll talk about what that is. But I have 20 years of work experience. I'm 46. Surprise myself some days.
I know that feeling.
So in organizational development and all sorts of management consulting outside and inside of industries. And currently, I focus completely on helping people discover or awaken their inner servant, selfless leader.
Yeah, no, I think it's, as I mentioned before, like I've seen your posts on LinkedIn, and I think a lot of the stuff really resonates. It really challenges how I think about stuff. One of the areas that we started with on the podcast and that I was really curious about is really understanding about how you got to that place and the kind of things that you identified that were happening in organizations that put you on the path that you're on now, and the impact that those kinds of leaders that existed in those organizations, and the impact that they had. Do you want to kind of talk us through a little bit about that, and then before we talk about selfless leadership?
I guess I could sum it up with that. We are people at work, and we are people trying to work together at work. Mm. But we sort of pretend that work, the organization, works totally differently from just being ourselves. So there was an inner transformation that took place for me, and it was bridging this inner transformation to who I am at work, and then figuring out, well, everybody's suffering under these same problems because they're all people. If we want to work a better place, we have to start in ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice way to put it, like that we're pretending to be someone else, that we're kind of inauthentic, and that we're not really being human. We're not being true to ourselves. And I know, like, some of the things that you spoke about on the podcast were this idea of ego and posturing and power, which, the concept of power, I think, is really interesting to me. And I've been listening to a couple of podcasts recently. I'm a huge fan of Adam Grant, and it just happened that this particular episode was in my podcast playlist recently, and he was talking about power and what it means. He had a great conversation with Esther Perel, and they were talking about, like, who holds the power. And, debating whether the CEO actually has the power, because he has the power to fire people. But at the same time, if no one works there, then his power is kind of diminished. So it was really interesting. And we're slightly gone off topic here. But we talked about the impact, and the kind of two of the things that stood out for me was, if people are on the receiving end of this type of leadership, and they get, they're like, well, I'm just, my voice doesn't matter, so I'm just going to sit here and do as little as possible. Or they're struggling to deal with it, and they're seeing, like, they're trying to figure out how do they fit into this dynamic where there's ego and there's power dynamics at play, and things like that. At the end of the day, you're not getting if this is happening in the organization, you're not getting the best from the people who work there.
No, and for me, it's really important that all of us are egos, right? Yeah. So I don't subscribe to the ego is only the arrogant, big, power over ego.
Yeah.
And I said this in the podcast as well, right? It's also me trying to improve work is also a form of ego.
That's a really good point, actually. Yeah. And we did talk about that, but the idea of self-serving, let's say. So, like, I want to do something because that's going to help me in my career, as opposed to thinking about other people. And that's kind of where we get into this idea of the selfless leadership. Do you want to explain to people exactly what that means?
Yeah, so just the ego, right, is normal. So we've been egoed. We come into this world and we create an ego, and it's important to see that's not necessarily something bad. But
It just
also,
is. Yeah.
it just is. It just
Yeah.
is. And of course, there are more, detrimental egos and better egos, but that's even besides the point, because
Yeah.
we get so focused on trying to improve the ego, improve the self. And what I try to point to with the selfless leadership is that we also have a part of ourselves. We are more than the ego.
Yeah.
We are more than the self. And it's possible for everyone to see this for themselves. And when you see that the core of what you are is actually not a self or more than a self, what comes, you're naturally selfless. You just become less interested in this ego thing, which you figure out is a construct. It's not even yours.
Yeah.
It's been conditioned.
Yeah.
You've received it from society and from your upbringing. So there's no need. It becomes much less central in your life. So this is natural selflessness, and this selfless part of us wants to be in service. There's no forcing service, or there's no thinking about, okay, what should I go out and do? Or what does service look like? That's all the mind. That's all ego.
Yeah. But
this natural selfless service, it's just, well, here I am, what is there to do? Oh, look, other people, look, a world, it's totally natural. Let me be in service to that, because why else am I here?
Yeah. No, it's a really great point. And I think, one of the key things that struck me is, and you mentioned this, that like oftentimes we think, oh, we have to learn a new model of leadership, or we have to learn how to be a certain way, when in fact what we're doing is we're unlearning everything that society has kind of taught us and how to be. So it's about stripping away. You described it as peeling the onion. I really like that analogy. But it's kind of, sorry, go on.
Well, it doesn't mean that these skills that we have are useless. So, you have to drive a car, you still need the skills for driving the car.
Yeah.
So it's unlearning, but it's not throwing away. It's just being able to, I also kind of word it as, we've made the ego the CEO of everything in our lives. And or the mind, and it's putting the mind or the ego back in its place as a servant to us, basically.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's a really interesting way to put it and to think about it. I think I had a conversation recently with Chris Flack from Unplug, all about technology and how we can kind of better use technology, if you like, or how do we disconnect, or how do we use it for good. And I'm a huge fan of Gretchen Rubin as well, and she talks about letting technology be a useful servant, but not a master. So it's she talks about the difference between it being a master and a servant. And if it serves you well, then that's great, but don't let it control you. Don't let it be the master. And I think maybe we're kind of talking about the same thing with the ego. So don't let yourself be controlled by the ego. It's about having it serve you in a way that that benefits. Well, I'm like, benefits you? Oh no, there is no me. this is how things got very deep on the full podcast. For anyone who's tuned in and who hasn't listened to the full podcast episode yet, you should find a link in the comments below to the full episode if you want to check that out. It's around 45 minutes or there, but actually, do you know what? I think it's a bit of a longer one. I think it's about an hour long, but definitely worth listening to that episode, the full episode. We cover a lot of ground, and got really interesting. And as I said, it got pretty deep as well, which is always good. You were going to say something there, Katrijns.
Yeah,
sorry.
No, I was going to say that what often happens is that our ego takes over this as well. So it's like the ego is like, okay, I'm going to see that I don't exist.
Now we're getting very meta.
So it becomes another ego project. So that's also not, it's fine if that happens. That happens at first, and I mean, I did that for years. Everybody falls into this trap. But eventually, you come to see that this is really beyond all of that. And it's pointing to the truth of what we are as human beings, which changes how we deal with all this stuff, right? All this, how we deal with leadership, how we deal with becoming, with improving, with life and suffering and everything.
No, it's just so interesting and fascinating to me. Do you want to talk? You shared on the podcast as well some of the benefits of this type of approach or this new way of doing things. I mean, I'm kind of like, I'm always very conscious about how to describe it now in case I'm describing it from a very me or egocentric place. But yeah, maybe like a new approach or a new way of doing things.
Yeah, so one of the immediate effects of seeing this, our core of selflessness and service, is that this whole anxiety or stress of improving ourselves disappears.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
And this is like this first insight that we talked about, we're not the doer.
yeah.
So life lives us, and this is very counterintuitive for many people. But
It
when
is. Yeah, 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 yeah. No, it I was going to say it took me a while to get my head around that, and I'm probably still processing that.
yeah,
And especially in society today, in work, it's all about productivity. It's all about how do I get better at doing this? How do I improve myself? All of this, like that's kind of what drives us. You know, we talked a little bit about this idea of being human, and being human, are we not born into wanting to grow, or is that something that society places on us?
yes.
Yeah, so that's like, I think it's pretty powerful to wrap your head around that one.
Yeah, and it's crucial to understand that it's not that the will to improve disappears. It's
Mm.
just that you see that it's not you doing that. So you
Yeah,
don't need to stress about it. If
yeah,
you're
yeah,
going to
yeah,
improve, you're going to improve. You're going to
yeah,
learn new stuff. It doesn't stop you from developing,
yeah,
but it takes away this idea that we have to do life. We're in
yeah.
charge to get this under control, and we don't have it under control, and that's where the stress comes from.
Okay, yeah, 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 yeah. Another thing you mentioned was that once you kind of get that, that's about 80%. You're about 80% of the way there then,
Yes.
through, you know, the work that you need to do to be able to become a selfless leader.
Yeah.
Do you want to kind of talk about some of the other benefits that you had mentioned?
Yeah, so the other thing that really disappears for most people is judgment, and
Mm,
not judgment in the sense of, where do I turn right, but judgment in the sense of making people feel responsible for their behavior and it's their fault. So it's more in the shame and blame and
yeah,
guilt type of area.
yeah,
When you see that people are being lived just as you are and it's all conditioned, um, this idea that you're responsible if you make a mistake. So the
yeah,
whole psychological safety thing, the whole, respect and empathy and compassion at work, all of this stuff that we're trying to achieve comes naturally when you see that we're being
yeah,
lived and that we're not the
yeah,
ego.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it's really interesting, I think, because that is the way I see things going work wise, you know, in the more forward thinking organizations, let's say. It isn't about creating a blame culture. It's not about finding who's responsible. It's about saying this happened, and now let's find a solution and let's look at the process to make sure that this doesn't happen again. But what you're saying is even going
Yes.
beyond that again, that it's saying, well, let's not even go, like, let's not even think about that. Like, let's take it from an understanding that we're all just living in this conditioned behavior.
Yes, so these insights that I'm talking about, they take away the need to implement rules or to learn
Mm.
skills or to, how do I do compassion? Well, you don't have to do compassion. Compassion is what you are when
Yeah,
you
yeah,
see that you're not the ego.
yeah, yeah.
It stops this whole we're trying to achieve things and create things. Well, if we would just
Mm.
relax and be what we are, we can stop.
Yeah,
We can
yeah, yeah,
be already.
yeah,
It's
yeah, yeah, yeah. You shared some really great examples as well as some of the clients that you had worked with as well, and the insights that they're kind of getting. And suddenly, like, this stress just seems to disappear, and they're not feeling the constant drive to do stuff all the time as well. So it's such an interesting. So thank you so much for your time today and for your time on the podcast as well. If people want to connect with you, they should see a link. You know, if there's anyone who's not connected with you, your LinkedIn profile should be in the description there for people to connect with you. But do you want to tell people a little bit about your book, where they can find it, or if they want to do this work with you, how they could find out more about that as well?
Yes, of course, gladly. This is the book, and it's available on Amazon in paperback or ebook form, and it contains actually everything that I talk about in coaching. That I tried to put as much into the book as I could in a one-to-many format, without being able to do the individual coaching, obviously. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
everything's there, and it's a great start to see how I work with clients or how to start getting these insights for yourself.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I've really, really enjoyed our chat today, as I did. I mean, time seems to have flown by yet again today. We're nearly at 15 minutes now. But thank you so much for your time today. And I look forward to chatting to you again soon.
Thank you.